February 1943. A frozen valley in the mountains of Norway sleeps under a crust of ice and moonlight. Until the silence snaps. A single alarm wails through the darkness. Then another. Then all of them. Guard dogs explode into frantic barking, their chains rattling against metal posts. Floodlights sweep across the ravine, cutting white tunnels through the drifting snow. German soldiers rush from their barracks, rifles half-buttoned, boots slipping on the icy ground as they scramble toward their posts. Something has gone terribly wrong at Vemork. Inside the cliffs above the river, inside the world's largest heavy water facility, gauges flicker, steam hisses, and a thin trail of smoke creeps up from the basement. The plant, one of the most heavily guarded industrial sites anywhere in Nazi-occupied Europe, has been sabotaged. But there's a problem. The Germans can't find anyone. No tracks, no bodies, no forced entry, no sign an enemy patrol even came close. A fortress carved into the side of a near vertical ravine has been hit by ghosts. And as panicked officers shout orders into the winter wind, a question hangs over Vemork like a second layer of frost. How did anyone reach a fortress carved into a cliff? To understand what was destroyed tonight, we need to go back to the beginning, before the alarms, before the blizzard of searchlights, before the war even reached Norway. Europe is tense, but the race for atomic energy is still in its early steps. Several nations are searching for a way to split the atom cleanly and control the chain reaction. The Germans choose a different path from the Americans. Instead of graphite, they turn to something rarer, heavier, and far more difficult to produce: deuterium oxide, heavy water. The concept is simple enough. Replace the hydrogen in normal water with deuterium, an isotope with an extra neutron, and the resulting heavy molecule can slow neutrons down without absorbing them. In the quest to control nuclear fission, that tiny difference becomes enormous. In other words, heavy water is a gatekeeper. Whoever controls it controls the next stage of the atomic race. And that brings us back to the stakes. If the Germans crack nuclear energy first, if they build a functioning reactor, if they stabilize the chain reaction, if they move one step closer to an atomic weapon, then the war changes shape entirely. Cities, armies, entire nations could be erased. If the Germans get the bomb first, Europe burns. Which leads to the second question that has haunted Allied intelligence since the day Nazi troops marched into Norway. Why was this single plant, the one now ringing with alarms, the point that could change the entire war? Several men already knew the answer. And within weeks, the world would know too. Imagine rising through the cold night air, higher, higher, until you see it the way Allied reconnaissance once did. A lone concrete giant perched on a ledge halfway up a mountain, glowing faintly against the snow. Vemork. It doesn't look like a factory. It looks like a fortress. From above, the terrain resembles a broken crescent. To the south, thick forest rises into jagged ridges. To the east and west, the land falls into cliffs so steep they seem carved by an axe. And directly beneath the plant, the world simply drops away. A 1,000-foot plunge from summit to river floor, with only a narrow ribbon of icy water winding through the bottom. To reach the plant from the north, one single road slices along the mountainside. But even this path is a trap. It crosses a suspension bridge barely wide enough for a vehicle, the only direct access point, and one constantly guarded by armed sentries. Now zoom closer. Around the main building sit electrified fences, snaking like steel thorns. Machine gun nests are dug into the slopes. Guard towers stand at rigid intervals, their searchlights sweeping the ravine in cold arcs. Patrols walked the perimeter with dogs trained to react to the slightest movement. And beneath the snow, invisible to any intruder, hundreds of S-mines, spring-loaded anti-personnel charges, wait to shred anything unlucky enough to step on them. This was not simply a production site. It was a fortress built to be untouchable. Which raises the question the Allies struggled with for years. If bombing couldn't work and the only bridge was a death trap, what was left? They tried an answer once. It ended in catastrophe. Late in 1942, Operation Freshman launched the first attempt to neutralize Vemork. 2 gliders filled with specially trained engineers were to land on the Hardanger Plateau, link up with a Norwegian advance team, and storm the plant from the rear slopes. But the weather turned murderous. Navigational errors threw the aircraft off course. Icing froze control surfaces. One glider crashed into a mountainside, killing or mortally wounding everyone aboard. The second landed hard, breaking apart on the frozen ground. The survivors were captured within hours, interrogated, and under Hitler's infamous commando order, executed. It was a disaster, and it changed everything. Shaken by how close the Allies had come, the Germans moved into overdrive. More patrols, more lights, more mines, more scrutiny of every worker, every visitor, every shadow. Now the fortress was awake. Which brings us to the new mystery, the one British High Command asked themselves again and again. Now that the enemy expects sabotage, how can anyone even get close? Somewhere in the mountains of Norway, 6 men would soon attempt to answer that question, while the Germans tightened their grip around Vemork. Far across the North Sea, another group was preparing quietly, relentlessly, and in near total secrecy. Company Linge. Norwegian Commandos forged under British Special Operations executive training, hardened in the frozen Scottish Highlands. Picture it. Wind screaming over white ridges, rifles freezing to bare hands, men skiing uphill with full packs until their lungs burned, navigation drills in blizzards so thick you could barely see your boots. This wasn't training for soldiers. This was training for ghosts. And among the ranks, 6 men would be chosen for something far more dangerous than a typical sabotage mission. Joachim Runeberg, the analyst, just 23 years old. Quiet, precise. Everything he touched, from explosives to maps, was done with methodical calm. The kind of mind that could think clearly while standing inches from death. Knut Haukelid, the fighter older, tougher, born with a rebellious streak. He'd escaped the Gestapo, fought in Norway, and refused to be broken by anything, not pain, not cold, not fear. Frederick Kaiser, the point man, tall, athletic, and naturally steady under pressure. A mover. If someone had to take the first step into danger, Kaiser volunteered. For Casper Eidland, the instinct. A natural scout with sharp eyes and sharper timing. The kind of man who sensed traps before others saw them. Hans Storhaug, the strength. A powerhouse, reliable and calm, able to haul gear through storms that would stop lesser men. Birger Strömsheim, the technician, precise hands, quiet mind. Perfect for delicate explosives work. 6 men, 6 different strengths, yet one impossible target. Which leads to the question that military planners asked privately. What made these 6 believe they could succeed where 60 men had died or failed? The answer waited in the Norwegian mountains. Months earlier, Operation Grouse, sent to prepare the ground for freshmen, had not been captured. Despite starvation-level rations and brutal cold, the survivors were still alive, hiding in the wild under a new code name, Swallow Team. These men knew the terrain like a living map. They'd studied German patrol patterns, and they had discovered something extraordinary. Something even the Germans didn't fully understand about Vemork's defenses. With fresh intelligence, a new plan began to take shape. A plan that demanded stealth over firepower, precision over numbers, ghosts over soldiers. The name of that plan would soon become legend: Operation Gunnerside. On the night of February 17, 1943, a Halifax bomber rumbled through the Arctic sky toward Norway. Inside, the 6 men of Operation Gunnerside sat in silence, hands wrapped around their parachute straps, listening to the engines fight the wind. When the green light flicked on, they jumped into the dark. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that a navigational error had placed them 25 kilometers off target. Instead of landing near the rendezvous point, they came down on a frozen lake surrounded by nothing but white emptiness. When dawn broke, it revealed the scale of the mistake. They weren't just off course. They were stranded in a frozen nowhere, and the weather was about to close in. A blizzard roared across the plateau, burying the landscape beneath several feet of drifting snow. For 5 straight days, the wind hammered them without mercy. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. Their boots stiffened into ice. Their rifles grew a crust of frost. Every breath crystallized in front of their faces. Their rations, never plentiful to begin with, began running out. A handful of biscuits, a few slivers of chocolate. Nothing more. They dug snow shelters. They melted handfuls of ice for water. They waited and waited. It was survival in its rawest form. But they held on because somewhere out there, hidden in the wilderness, another group was waiting for them, the remnants of Operation Grouse. When the storm finally broke, the men pushed forward across the Hardanger Plateau. They skied through waist-deep snow, over ridges, across frozen streams, following compass bearings through terrain that looked identical in every direction. After days of struggling, frostbitten and starving, they reached a small shack nearly buried in snowdrifts. Inside were the men they had hoped to find. Swallow Team, gaunt, exhausted, but alive. With the 2 teams united, planning began immediately, and so did the next question. What route could possibly bypass dogs, mines, cliffs, MG nests, and a guarded suspension bridge? Local guides warned them. The gorge was suicide. The slopes were too steep, the snow too deep, the river too dangerous. But Runneberg's team rejected the idea of blending with workers on the bridge. It would get civilians killed. So they turned to the terrain itself. And that's when they remembered something crucial. Months earlier, Swallow Team had spoken with Jomar Brun, a former plant engineer. His knowledge included a detail the Germans had overlooked: a railway line running along the mountainside into the facility, remote, exposed, and likely lightly guarded. A potential weakness, the only weakness. And now, the target of their final approach. February 27, 43. Near midnight, the wind slices across the mountains like a blade as 6 figures glide silently down the northern slope toward Vemork. This is the night everything has led to. The night where one mistake means death, and one success could change the entire war. The Commandos remove their skis, plant them in the snow, and begin climbing down the icy ravine on foot. The shadows swallow them. Every foothold, every breath, every crunch of snow is deliberate. This isn't movement, it's disappearance. Halfway down the slope, headlights suddenly bloom in the darkness. A bus. The plant's shift workers heading up the mountain at the worst possible moment. Runneberg freezes. 2 of his men are lying just meters above the road, almost directly over the passing vehicle. If they slip, they'll drop onto the roof. The team holds their breath as the bus grinds uphill, gears churning, lights sweeping through the trees. It passes, barely. Their infiltration hangs by a thread, But the thread holds. Next comes the bridge, the only direct path into Vemork. They approach, crawling through the snow, but the guard station is swarming with sentries. Floodlights wash over the structure. Dogs pace the eastern end. There's no way through. The bridge is suicide. Runneberg sends a scout upriver, praying for a miracle. Hours later, the man returns, face white with frost, but smiling. He found it. A shallow, frozen crossing, hidden among boulders and trees, narrow enough to move across without being exposed. It's risky. The ice groans beneath them with every step, but it's the only chance. The men crawl across on hands and knees, rifles strapped to their backs, explosives held above the freezing water. Each creak of ice sounds like it could give way at any moment. But the river holds. Now on the southern bank, they climb again, steep, brutal terrain, until they reach the old railway line, exactly where Brune said it would be. Ahead lies the final barrier, the outer fence. They wait in total silence, watching the Germans below. The guard change is supposed to happen at midnight, but tonight, what if the Germans change their routine? Minutes stretch like hours. Then, it happens. Sentries switch. The barracks door closes. Runneberg nods. A padlock snaps quietly under wire cutters. The gate opens. 6 shadows slip inside the most heavily guarded industrial site in occupied Europe. The team divides like a machine. Cover squad fans out near the barracks, fingers on triggers. Demolition squad pushes into the 7-story building. They descend floor after floor, metal stairs, echoing pipes, dim lights, until they reach the basement. Locked. No entry, no time. Then one of them remembers Brune's final gift. The cable duct, a narrow crawl space running above the capacitor room. They pry it open. One by one, the Commandos crawl through darkness, inches above the heads of workers, feeling the hum of machines through their elbows. They drop down into the capacitor room. 18 cylinders of heavy water stand before them. The fate of the German bomb project sits in silence, waiting. The demolition squad hits the floor of the capacitor room like a whisper, boots landing softly between pipes, gauges, and towering metal cells filled with heavy water. 18 cylinders. Months of German work. The heart of the Nazi nuclear project. And standing among them is a single man, a worker in overalls, hunched over a logbook. His name is Johansson. He turns in surprise, expecting Germans, only to find 4 frozen-faced Norwegians staring back at him. For a moment, no one moves. Then, hearing his own language spoken in a whisper, Norwegian, Johansson seems to understand. He raises his hand slowly. No shouting, no panic, no attempt to stop them. Only one request. He wants his glasses. They're his only pair. Difficult to replace under occupation. Runneberg, pressed for time and fully aware they could be discovered any second, still digs through the room, finds the case, and hands it over. Johansson insists they aren't inside. After a frantic search, they're found, being used as a bookmark in his logbook. It's a surreal, human pause in a night balanced on a knife edge. Then, the moment ends. The Commandos get to work. Each man moves with practiced precision, charges placed on pipes, valves, and the refining equipment that turns raw material into precious, heavy water. The plan calls for 2-minute fuses, enough time to escape. But the team knows they may not have that luxury. Footsteps or a patrol could appear at any moment. Runneberg makes the call. Change the fuses. 30 seconds. It's insane, but necessary. They light the fuses, tiny sparks chewing down the cords, and sprint out the air vent, scrambling into the cable duct just as the countdown begins. 30 seconds, 20, 10, then a dull, heavy thud. Not the roaring blast anyone expected. The thick concrete absorbs almost all the sound. Down in the valley, even the dogs don't bark. Which leads to the question the Germans would puzzle over until dawn. Why did no one hear the explosion? Because the basement was a bunker inside a bunker. Only one guard steps outside, sweeping his flashlight lazily across the lower floors. He sees nothing, because the cover squad is already in position, rifles aimed, waiting silently. They never fire a shot. Above them, the demolition squad slips back through the fence into the snow, disappearing as quietly as they arrived. Ghosts again. And behind them, in the bowels of Vemork, the German nuclear program is dying in the dark. For several long minutes after the charges detonated, Vemork remained strangely still. No alarms, no gunfire, no chase. But as the Commandos were already descending the ravine, already vanishing into the snowstorm, a distant shout finally broke through the night. Then the sirens erupted. Searchlights shot in every direction, sweeping across the cliffs. Dogs barked wildly, soldiers poured into the yard, and officers screamed orders into the icy wind. Smoke began leaking through the grates of the lower-level ventilation shafts, the first sign that something terrible had happened deep underground. By the time the Germans reached the basement, it was too late to save anything. Over 500 kilograms of heavy water were destroyed. More importantly, the delicate machinery required to refine and concentrate heavy water was shattered beyond quick repair. Pipes bent like paper, valves ripped apart, electrolytic cells ruptured and spilling their contents. It wasn't just damage, it was a reset. Months, maybe years, erased in a single blast. The German nuclear program didn't die in one night. But its momentum, the quiet, terrifying progress it had been making, was broken. The Allies had struck the one place that mattered, the one bottleneck Germany could not replace quickly. And that leads to the question historians still ask today. If Germany had produced the bomb first, what world would we live in today? Would London have survived? Would Moscow? Would the war have ended differently? Would millions have died in a flash of light instead of a hail of bullets? We will never know. Because 6 men decided the world would not find out. As for them, Knut Haukelid refused to stop. In 1944, when the Germans attempted to transport the remaining heavy water by ferry across Lake Tinn, Haukelid boarded the vessel in secret and planted explosives. The ferry, SF Hydro, sank, sending the last of Germany's heavy water stock to the bottom of the lake. It was the final blow to the Nazi atomic dream. Joachim Rönneberg, the man who led Gunnerside, lived a quiet life after the war. He rarely spoke of the raid, insisting he had only done his job. He disliked the spotlight and avoided grand statements. When asked how he wanted the mission remembered, he simply said, "It was necessary." Decades later, historians would call Operation Gunnerside the most successful sabotage mission of World War II. Others would go further. They would say that in a frozen valley, on a night filled with alarms and snow and silence, 6 men tilted the balance of the entire war. They didn't just destroy heavy water, they saved millions who never knew their names.